let's look at, where to start. Why do we always think of witches as old women? A lot of the time, these wise women um, were women that were um, generally of an older age because they'd had to learn this craft and stuff, and like that was a family tradition. So they'd learned it from their mothers, grandmothers, um, and they tended to be loners. They were often widows. Um, they might be cantankerous and have fallen out with their neighbours because a lot of the women that were accused of being witches in witch trials were people that maybe didn't get on with their neighbours and were like outcasts within the community because they'd been made out to be that. Um, or maybe they just weren't that agreeable and just didn't want to socialise, like, fine. But yeah, so quite often they were old women who couldn't contribute to the community in the same way. They were no longer fertile. This is like quite a weird tangent, but some of the podcasts go into this, and it's really interesting. Recommend that you go and look that up. So they were seen as like unnatural and unfertile, and like, what are they giving back? Why are they still around, kind of thing. And so yeah, so this idea began to evolve that like if you're old, you keep to yourself and you're not agreeable with your neighbours, what are you doing in your house by yourself? Like, you're not reliant on a man anymore. You're independent. Like, what are you up to? There is also a darker side to do with witch trials, where these women, in order to get them to admit to being witches, they were tortured. And there is definitely a law or Cabinet of Curiosities podcast that talks about when these women went in to the jail or before being tortured, they might have looked like a normal member of society, but after torture, they would have been beaten and like just maimed, and God knows what was done to them. And so when they were finally like seen by the public again, they would have been disfigured, and like maybe their noses had been broken, like God knows what had been done to these poor women. And that was, and then they were declared to be witches, so it was almost like they'd been transformed into these hideous looking creatures, and that was a witch. So that is one possible reason why people immediately think of a witch as being like ugly and sort of disfigured and kind of gross to look at, which is really, really dark and horrible. But it's one theory, one explanation. As for sort of wearing black and wearing a cape, capes were seen as sort of, again, when magic was like a real thing, capes were a way of like hiding yourself, hiding your secrets. They were sort of, and also very dramatic. And witches were seen as being very secretive and hiding things and mystical. And so like the cape became part of that mythology. Again, this is just one theory. Who knows where these things really come from. It's not like someone wrote down and said, and suddenly witches wore capes. Boom. As for stockings, apparently that might have been like a marketing ploy by a company, sort of in the 1920s, which is weird. But the pointy shoes thing, pointy shoes, again, hundreds of years ago, were the type of shoes worn by like jesters, and therefore like they were tricksters and people that played pranks and tricks on people and tried to sort of deceive you. and that's what they were associated with. And that's the kind of thing that witches did, right? Like they tried to deceive you. They were like bad people trying to trick you and deceive you. So that is again maybe another element of why people associate pointy shoes with witches. Who knows? And the green skin thing, I looked that up because I was like, nowhere apparently in like ancient sort of mythology and folklore and stuff around and documents around witch like folklore and witch trials and things like that, nowhere does it mention that suddenly these women had green skin. That all came from the film The Wizard of Oz. It's not even in the original book, but it's in the film. And the only explanation that I could find in articles was that if you've not seen the film, which I assume most people have, but if you haven't, and this isn't a spoiler, the film moves from black and white to Technicolor partway through, and there is the evil witch, and she has green skin. And the only real explanation that people can think of is that the film company wanted to show off that this was in Technicolor, and they wanted to make it really obvious that the bad guy, like the witch, this evil witch, was totally different to everyone else. Kind of almost alien, totally unnatural, not human, not good. And green is like such an unnatural colour, and so they gave her green skin to make her seem like extra weird and different and creepy and unnatural. And that is why we sometimes think of witches as having green skin, which if you think about it now, you're just like, huh, that is really weird. Like, where's that come from? Blame the Wizard of Oz. Now on to my favourite bit, the pointy hat. Where on earth does this come from? My favourite theory, which is just one of many, because again, it's, you know, it's not like someone wrote down hundreds of years ago and said this is what witches wear. It's not like all the witches came together and agreed on a uniform. It's just like aspects that have come to be associated with a certain type of woman over the years, and has been like force fed and reinforced by stories over time, and then has, again, like over time, just like been condensed, and suddenly you have this idea of what a witch looks like. But one idea is another type of woman that would have been, or maybe not powerful, but had an important role within the community and within the household, was that of an alewife. So again, back in the day, a long, long time ago, brewing beer was woman's work. It wasn't a guy's thing. Like now we associate craft beer and the beer industry and drinking beer with men, basically, don't we? Although there are people fighting against that, and I like it. But it used to be that just another part of the woman's role at home would be to brew beer, because drinking beer was actually safer than drinking water, because water wasn't clean and purified like it is today. They didn't have the technology, so they brewed beer instead, and that was safer to drink. But if the woman produced more beer than the family needed, then they would often go and sell the excess at markets, which is also where the idea of the cauldron comes from, potentially. Um, there's a I might as well call this whole episode allegedly, because none of it's, you know, you can't really prove any of it, but these are just some ideas that people have had over time. And one way that they think these alewives used to like advertise that they had something to sell and like stand out from the crowd literally was to wear these very tall pointy hats, which were like it was a type of hat that people wore back then, or that certain groups within the community wore. Certain religious groups may have worn them, um, but the theory that I've heard a lot and that I really like is that these alewives wore these big pointy hats, which did exist at the time anyway, to sort of stand literally above the crowd, and so people could see them go, there's an alewife, she's selling beer. She would have had a big vat of it, so it would have looked like a big cauldron, and people would go and buy beer from her. Again, this comes back into the fact that there were women being able to make money off something that they knew how to do, and certain groups of men didn't really like that and they wanted in on it. So then they started to kind of say, well, you don't know what's in that cauldron. What if it's bad? What if, you know, they're trying to poison you? Because again, these women knew how to use herbs and plants and things to create this magic potion, which is beer. That's one option. And this is also potentially where the broomstick came in, that apparently, like, a broomstick outside a house was a signal that you could go and buy beer from there. Not like, it's a bit of a stretch because like everyone back then would have had a broom. But anyway, so that is again one potential. And there are some other theories around broomsticks, hallucinogenic properties, and why women would have had brooms between their legs and be flying around on them. I'm going to leave it at that because that is, I don't know where you're watching this. I don't know where you're listening to it. So go and look that one up too. And then I'm just going to go into one final little bit to keep it light, and that is around the black cat.